What the answer was. With these new luminaries or lights, what is the lifespan on those? That may not be for sure, but I mean, you know, what...
Yeah, it really depends on the manufacturer and who's providing them and what their research has shown. The LEDs typically are considered to have a much longer lifespan than you'd see on a sodium light, like the orange, the yellow ones that we all grew up with. Anywhere from 5 to 20 times, depending on which study you look at. They seem to do well, and they're much lower energy. They have come a long ways in terms of the light output or the lumen level so that you can actually see when you're underneath these things. Now, you think about some of the old compact fluorescents that people have in their homes today, and everybody complains that, you turn them up, but you just can't see. It just seems dark. The LEDs don't seem to have that problem, and they do have a much better energy footprint and seem to have a much longer life. Okay. So this project would light that entire corridor. Certainly we'd be looking very hard at all the intersections where we've got crosswalks to make sure that we've got an appropriate amount of lighting so that those pedestrians that are in those crosswalks at those intersections can definitely be seen. Roughly 36 lights in this case, and a budget of a bit over $800,000. With a local match at that 7.34% of roughly $61,000. Again, these numbers will vary a little bit as we fine-tune the estimates, but that would be the third project and the second of the LSIPs. So back to, I believe, Art, it was your question about 6th Street. How does it fit in with the realignment? Well, that's our fourth and final. So that location is, of course, right down there at Jackson and 6th Street, and this is the parcel. It's labeled here as the Legacy Crossing Urban Renewal District. Of course, that whole area is within the district. That's the urban renewal site that is slated to be a new restaurant, mixed-use, residential-type facility, hopefully in the next year or so. That is the same area that we have worked with the district on additional right-of-way acquisition, so that we could then realign those eastbound lanes, particularly the eastbound through lane that is directly opposite the westbound left turn pocket, which is a bit of an issue and a conflict, plus the bike lane that's in there. As you'll recall, we've talked about this project before. It is something that is in our budget currently in the 2017 fiscal year. It is something that we have gone partway through the design process already, anticipating that originally that we were going to fund this with city money and participation from the URA, both in land and potentially in some of their own costs related to utility undergrounding. In the workshop that LTAC put on in this room on Wednesday afternoon of last week, it became somewhat apparent that, this is a project that probably would fare reasonably well in these grant programs. So we decided that, okay, let's add this in. And the accident history is there, pedestrian and bicycle and vehicle accident history. So it is eligible. This particular project probably has the lowest cost-benefit ratio of the four, as I recall. In other words, it doesn't fare quite as well in terms of the anticipated safety enhancement, as with respect to the cost. It's got a cost-benefit ratio of 6 to 1. Looking back at how LTAC has been funding LSIP projects, they've gone as low as 4 to 1 ratios, and so we think the 6 to 1, even though it's much lower than the other three projects, is still viable. So we thought, let's put it in there and see how it goes. If we are successful in getting the grant funding for this project through this program, then the money that we've set aside so far to date obviously could deal with the local match, but it could then potentially be used for other projects related to streets around the city. Okay.
Just a question. For them to consider things, did it matter that that hasn't been built yet?
The neighboring property?
Mm-hmm. Like I know it doesn't.
No, they're looking at roadways. They're looking at transportation corridor safety, and what's adjacent to it, while it may be contributing, is really not their consideration. It is, are we having accidents within the corridor that we can fix through these programs? And whether it's somebody that's coming out of the neighboring business or they're walking down the corridor from campus and the incidents happening there really probably doesn't matter to them. It's just that it's happening there. Okay. So one more thing I wanted to mention is that in the overall funding package, we've talked a little bit about the local match. For the lighting projects, well, let me start with North Polk. For the TAP project, we're anticipating that local match would come out of our capital program, the streets component most likely. The 6th Street corridor lighting and the 3rd Street corridor lighting would come out, the city's cost would come out of our street light program. There is potential that the district, the URA, might be willing to share in the costs, and that's something that Bill Belknap will be discussing with the board of the district, I believe, yet this week, if I recall, the possibility of participation there. So if the district chooses to do so, then obviously the city's cost for the local match would come down. And then that also would apply, then the final one is the 6th and Jackson realignment, which would be capital project funding. As I said, we have funding already identified that can go towards that project in that fund. So, I think that's all I have. So if you have any questions.
Elise has walked up here. Let's let her.
Come up behind me.
She may be able to shed some light on some things that
And
people
one more
have
slide,
questions.
just real quick. Those are the things that will change. Of course, the eastbound through lane, the eastbound bike lane, eastbound right turn lane would all be shifted to the south, along with the new curb location and a wider sidewalk in that area. Budget approximately $320,000, local match of $24,000. And again, this is one of those, actually Walter and I talked about this earlier today, that $320,000 is higher than the amount we have budgeted in our fiscal year 17. And part of that, again, is those markups that you see on these types of projects that I talked about a few minutes ago. And I think that was it. Okay.
Les,
Go ahead, Jim.
I didn't get where the match for the 3rd Street one, the 61,000, where's that coming from? Is that,
Third Street lighting would come from the city street light program, as
Okay.
well as the 6th Street lighting would come from the city street light program, with the possibility that the Urban Renewal District might participate in some of that cost.
And then both of the others are the capital project
That's
funds? Okay.
Just one thing I'd like to add, and Les did a great job of covering a lot of details. It was discussed at the LTAC meeting last week that ITD has also been given an allocation of funding under the upcoming FY17 program for the LSIP. And so they were really urging us to submit projects that were on the state highway because ITD has money, and it would be what we call a joint application or a joint project. So there could be an opportunity, if we have the support letter from the state, from ITD in with our packet, that it gives it a better weight of being funded because they always encourage collaboration. There's possible a potential. I was speaking to Layla today at LTAC, and with the lighting system for 3rd Street being on the State Highway 2, we might be able to see some participation from the state there also. So I think when you have a joint project, even though the cost ratio may be lower on that, I think it gives it a much better chance of being funded.
And this application has to be in by the 4th of November, correct?
Yes.
Catherine?
My question had to do with something originally that Les was saying, and either one of you can answer it. It had to do with, like, if it doesn't get accepted in the 2017, it could be bumped to the 2019. But did you submit, you're going to try to submit 4 in hopes that one will go to 17, another will go to 19? So, or I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, how you potentially see it getting funded. Does that make sense? Yeah.
There are really, again, 2 funding pools here to
Yeah.
work with. The TAP fund, one project within the TAP, and that's the one opportunity under that TAP program for this funding cycle. Okay, so that'd be the North Polk Street.
Yeah.
The other 3 would all be under the LSIP for 2017. And hopefully they'll fund at least one and maybe more. Those that would not be funded, whether it's one or all, would then roll into the 2019 pool of applicants. So the idea here is that, they've got funding, they're looking for projects. How many people can pull them together in short order for 2017?
I'm gonna go to John
We think we
next.
have the ability to do that, and, there's the potential you could see funding for multiple projects.
John, you had a question?
Well, I'm ready to make a motion if we're ready to go on this.
Okay, I'll come back to, if you want to make a motion, make it, we'll get the second, then I'll go to Walter, because he's got something, a comment he wants to make.
Actually, I'll defer to Walter.
Okay, Walter?
I want to compliment Elisa and Les and his shop for putting this together as quickly as they have. This meeting was last Wednesday.
That's right.
Packet came out at 10:34 Friday morning, if I'm not mistaken. So somebody really hustled to throw this together. I think they had some hints it was coming, so they had a little bit of a head start on the rest of the field, but an excellent job of throwing this together. Les, if I may, one question on the intersection work at 6th and Jackson. Under the current city budget, you mentioned that there's money in the budget for that. Was there any other participation in funding that work in the city budget thinking? Not this project, but the city budget thinking.
Related to that intersection itself, the only funding I'm aware of related to that intersection, or basically the realignment project, is the one line item in capital projects.
Okay, there wasn't any participation by the developer of that corner or by the URA or anything?
Bill, you got a...
I don't remember for sure.
I see where you're going.
Yes, there's a portion of that total project cost that is going to be borne by the agency. I think the city's share that was budgeted was the frontage improvements that were necessary to accommodate the turn lane. The agency was then going to pick up two elements. One was there's some additional cost for the undergrounding of the utilities that's above and beyond just the turn lane construction itself. So there was approximately $56,000 in charges from Avista to pull the overhead utility lines through the conduits to be placed as part of the frontage improvement cost.
There's a pole in the way, or two.
There are a couple poles that we were looking at undergrounding as part of that project. So there was some off-site boring, and there was some additional Avista build cost. That was probably about $76,000 in utility expenses the agency was anticipating. And then the agency was anticipating covering the frontage from the corner down along Jackson to the agency's southerly property boundary on the Jackson frontage. So the agency has funded that work in its capital, in its budget for FY17. There is $500,000 that's budgeted in capital improvements in the district, and that's where we anticipate to participate in that. Now, we weren't sure exactly the timing of that improvement related to the development of the site. Obviously, if for whatever reason this improvement or the frontage improvement has to go forward in advance of the development of the property, the agency does have the funding available to participate and cover our share of the project.
So if I may, Mayor, so that the agency would participate whether this is funded through city budget or through the grant programs we're looking at?
Correct. We were unaware in the conversations over the last 24 months on this project. We were certainly unaware of this grant opportunity, and we were preparing to fund it independent of that.
Thank you.
And the other piece to note, if I may, is the right-of-way acquisition that is coming from the agency, a dedication from the agency. So there's obviously some value associated with that to give us sufficient room to do the realignment.
John?
Yeah, I'd move that we authorize submittal of the four proposed projects for LH, SIP, and TAP grant funding.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion by John and a second by Gina to authorize the submittal of the four proposal projects of LHSIP and the TAMP grant funding. I'll start the roll with Walter.
Aye.
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 Okay, go ahead, Elisa. Thank you very much, staff. For there was a team of people that hammered this thing together, as Walter had mentioned earlier, and it just shows the professionalism of our staff, which we're all very, very proud of. So, good job. Thank you very much.